hemen ilk oturumumuzla başlayacak.
Our summit will start with the first session. This session was sponsored by Türk Telekom, and in this session we will speak about the entrepreneurship and what should Turkey do. The moderator of this session will be Hakan Ateş, the CEO of Denizbank. I would like to invite the speakers, the chairman of the board of Simit Sarayı, Abdullah Kavukçu, advisor to World SME Forum, Yanamitra Devan, founder and CEO of Vinaya, Kate Answorth, member of the board Zorlu Holding, Mehmet Emre Zorlu, CEO of Türk Telekom, Paul Doney, and the chairman of the board of SBK Holding, Sezgin Baran Korkmaz. The floor is yours.
İsimler doğru mu abi? İsimler yanlış yazıyor ama katılıyoruz abi.
I would like to, yes. Evet, sanıyorum bütün hazırlıklar tamam.
I believe we are ready. Headsets are taken.
Everything is fine. No, we need one more. We need one more. For Kate, I guess. Okay. So, I'll direct my questions in Turkish, and then there's going to be a wonderful translation. Just another earphone is on its way. No. Yes. Mr. Sa is gentle enough to give his own to Kate. Wonderful. Evet. Değerli konuklar, Uludağ Ekonomi Zirvesi'nin ikinci günkü bugüne kadar
we are opening the second day of the Uludağ Economy Summit. Welcome to the most important panel of the Uludağ Economy Summit.
Şimdi bunun ilk panel olması tabii bana
Of course, this is the first session and this is the first panel. That's why I'm so confident to say that this is the most important panel. But as you can see, I have very important guests and they are coming from very different fields. But they have one thing in common, and they are dealing with the new model of entrepreneurship. Why this panel, this session is important? Very briefly, I will speak about this, and then we will have 70 minutes in total, and we will enjoy a very good 70 minutes of session. I will give each speaker 5 minutes, and each of our speakers will introduce themselves, and they will then speak about their perception about the Industry 4 and the new entrepreneurship. So this session will be like a hard talk of BBC type of session, and we will ask some questions, and everybody will have a chance to say what they think. I really want this session to be as interactive as possible. And if maybe we cannot find enough time for the question and answers, as a result of that, if you have any burning question, you can just raise your question and intervene, and in the second round, we can give a chance to our audience to raise their questions, so that our session will continue in an interactive manner. Okay, of course, I also would like to thank the sponsors, including our bank as well, for their contribution to this meeting, because this is a very good platform. We have a chance to see each other thanks to such organizations. And in addition to that, we are also having the chance to speak with the important speakers coming from abroad. And when I say beautiful speakers, you can easily see. Kate is a good example of that. So, in the session, we will speak about entrepreneurship for about 70 minutes. Vinaya, Kate Answorth is the founder of Vinaya. We have Abdullah Kavukçu, the Sultan of the Simit Sarayı. I would like to define him as such. And Janamitra Devan, advisor of the World SME Forum, is with us. And when I started to work as the Denizbank, to work for the Denizbank, I also have a shareholder with me right now, Mehmet Emre Zorlu, and Sezgin Baran Korkmaz is attending from SBK Holding, and he is actually doing a business that we generally don't know in Turkey, and I hope that he will evaluate his business. Paul Done, there is no need for us to introduce him. He is actually a good entrepreneur, and in Türk Telekom company with a good entrepreneurship spirit, he is actually supporting the new firms and new startups, and he is also an important angel investor. As you all know, according to the S&P, the average life of the companies were between 50 to 60 years, but right now the average life of the companies were reduced to 15 or 16 years. And S&P 500 said us that in the upcoming years, the top 500 companies will be comprised of the firms that their names we don't know about. In the top 10 countries right now, we have 5 technology companies, which was not the case in the past. And 10 years ago, 5 energy companies and 3 banks were at the top 10 companies in the world. But right now, this situation has changed. So the old model of entrepreneurship is out, and Industry 4 is in, and that's what we are going to speak about in this session. Eric Schmidt, the old Google CEO, says that we are not afraid of the top 500 companies in the S&P. We are afraid of the startups that we don't know about, that they are we are afraid of the companies that they are indeed trying to find something new. 70% of the new startups in Turkey can actually survive more than 1 year. According to Turkish Statistical Institute figures, many of the entrepreneurs founded their companies in the recent years. There are many funds in Turkey like KOSGEB, Turkish Scientific Institute, the ministries are also all supporting those SMEs. According to the research and development figures, our research and development allocation is increasing each day. But unfortunately, the budget that is allocated for the R&D with comparison to our GDP is only about 1%, but this was 2.4% in South Korea. And in China's $8 trillion economy, China is allocating 2.1% of their GDP for the research and development. And for the German economy, the 2.9% of the GDP is allocated to the research and development. Although the research and development budget is increasing, we are still lagging behind the developed countries. So I would like to give the floor to our speakers to speak about what is going on in London and also in Singapore. I would like to raise my first question to Kate. I hope that she can follow. Kate was actually working as a consultant at the age of 25 years old, and she was dealing with her tablet and mobile phone all the time. And then she decided to change her life. So she thought that I would like to start doing yoga before the hour of 5 a.m. and then she tried to integrate this cold technology with the warmness of the life. And she started a new business, and she collected $4.5 million of capital by convincing people. Of course, Kate is not 30 years old even right now. Of course, we are generally not speaking about the age of the woman, but she is right now Indeed, dealing with the design thinking, she has such a center, and she is creating something in that center. And she is creating some wearables. I'm not only speaking about some plastic-coated swatches. She is creating and designing wearables which are integrating into our lives. And she told me that she will do the spin-off. She will divide her company into 3 divisions, most probably, and maybe in the future we will hear those companies' name in the S&P 500 list. Could you briefly speak what you do, please?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. So yeah, I was working as a technology consultant, and I dedicated the start of my career to creating technology products. And I was trained as a developer, I was trained as a coder, I was sent out to India to learn Java, and I sat in these large coding academies. And what I realized was that despite the fact that I was really applying myself to the technology industry, technology was actually having a negative impact on my life. And it was negatively impacting my relationships, the way that I was interacting with people, the way that I was presenting myself in the world. As somebody who grew up with Facebook from quite a young age, we become quite accustomed to this idea of having an online profile and presenting ourselves in a certain way. And I think for young girls in particular, this can have a damaging effect long term on the way that we view ourselves and the way that we compare ourselves to other people. And so I realized that actually as a technologist, as one of the people who is creating these technology products, I needed to be conscious, I needed to be aware of the impact that my products were having on people. And the more research I did on this, the more I realized that it's not just impacting the way that we behave socially, it's actually impacting the way that our brains develop. And so it actually changes the way that the synapses fire in the brain and ultimately changes our DNA. So I realized that as a technologist, there's a real responsibility that comes with creating products that not only impact people's social behaviors, but ultimately the way that we evolve as a species. And so I created my company really to speak about this message and to encourage and inspire technology designers to really consider these things when they're creating technology. And so one of the things that I'm a big advocate of is less technology, so spending time away from the screen. And so what does the future look like? You know, in a world where technology is becoming ever more present, how are we going to integrate technology into our lives in the future? And how is it going to impact the way that we interact socially?
Excellent. Just, it reminded me 2 questions, Kate, if you allow me. First, I Googled you, and you keep saying nothing is urgent. What do you mean by that? Second, how do you charge the things on you? I mean, is human body maybe will become sort of a charger at some point in time?
That's fascinating. So starting with the second question, I think the fact that the human body could be a charger is something that is being explored. There's also these ideas of movement, so kinetic energy. So as you move, things charge. I worked with a PhD student at Oxford University who's developing this liquid that you can dip any product into, and it makes the whole product into a solar panel. So it charges from the sun. There's also different charging mechanisms using Wi-Fi, because we're always surrounded by Wi-Fi. So can our devices be charged remotely via Wi-Fi? So I think in the future we won't have to charge devices. That will definitely happen. Coming on to the first question, nothing's urgent. This was really an insight from when I was a management consultant. So I worked for Accenture, which is a very large technology company. And I was online all the time. I was receiving emails, hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, as I'm sure many of you in the room are the same. And I realized that everybody says what they're working on is important, and everybody, begins to say, I need this by today, this is urgent. And you know, I took that seriously. And as a young, somebody who was quite young on the team, I ended up with a lot of the work. So I never slept, and I just worked all the time. And I realized actually sometimes when people say something is urgent, they don't really mean it. So I talk about, you know, setting your own boundaries and really pushing people back and saying, actually, you know, can I reassess what's important? And so for 18 months, when I first started the company, I had an out-of-office response on 24/7, all the time. And every time you emailed me, it just said, I'm really sorry. I don't check email that frequently. I'm trying to be present with the people that I'm with, and I'm trying to focus on urgent tasks.
How about chatting with WhatsApp or any other beep, for instance, in Turkey?
Yeah,
I mean, can you skip or mitigate this type of chatting?
Yeah, and this is really the origins of the first product that I created with my company. We created a piece of software that captures all of your notifications and allows you to specify which notifications are important enough to filter through and make the jewelry vibrate. So I can say, alert me for emails from my boss or calls from my mom or whatever it is, and then I can ignore everything else until later in the day when I decide to check my email.
By the way, here is your mom, Nikki. Welcome, Nikki,
It's
to
Mother's
Turkey.
Day this weekend.
Mother's Day. Excellent. Ya çok tabii ilginç. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your for what you share. This process of digitalization shouldn't capture us, and she is fighting against the domination of the technology over our lives. And I am quite impressed in our chit-chat on the morning as we were having coffee. I believe this is something we should all do. How we will eliminate this, I don't know. And she also spoke about some, systems in which even the human body can charge those wearable technologies. I mean, we are indeed speaking about integrating technology with the natural life. I mean, if we cannot avoid Industry 4, we should learn how to live with her. And she is not a young entrepreneur, she's an important businesswoman right now. I would like to continue with our second guest. And we said that he is the Sultan of Simit Sarayı, this brand in Turkey. And I know his story in the district of Sultan Hamam. At the very early ages, he gained different experiences, especially in the stock exchange market, and then he started with quite a different business. And indeed, the United States of America, which is known for the donuts, right now they are consuming simit, the Turkish bagel. He opened many shops in the United States of America, and also in the London, in the Oxford Street. I mean, the people were indeed rushing onto each other to buy some Turkish bagels, buy some smits. And we were, of course, eating those Turkish bagels in our childhood, and it is such a cheap food, as you know. But he is selling those products for 7 or 8 Turkish liras, which is way more expensive as comparison to Turkey. And he is operational in 21 different countries, and I'm also supporting him with the finance since I'm working in a bank. And it's quite a good success story. And in terms of entrepreneurship, he is the one who actually advertised the Turkish bagel, this simit, to the world. And his business indeed expanded with such advertisement. I mean, those ready-made simit, those ready-made Turkish bagels which you are buying from the supermarkets are also produced by him. Just think about it for 1 minute and try to summarize what you have done in your career. How did you accomplish it? By the way, my headquarters of my bank is quite a crowded building. I indeed asked from him to, reduce the prices of the cement that we are selling next to our headquarters. I told him I will not charge you any rental price. We opened two shops next to our headquarters, and his simits, his Turkish bagels, are selling like hotcakes. And yes, please. First of all, good morning to everyone. By the way, I'm spending my 4 days abroad in a week, so this is such an early hour for me. If I cannot explain myself very well, I would like to apologize in advance. You spoke about the prices, and in the foreign countries, everybody is complaining why you are so expensive, especially in abroad. But of course, we are making our evaluation based on the purchasing power parity of the people. If a Turkish people is earning 2,000 Turkish liras in Turkey, an American people is earning $2,000 in the United States of America. So we are kind of establishing that Turkish bagel index according to the salaries. So this is translated into our pricing policy. I mean, if a Turkish bagel is sold for 2.5 Turkish liras in Turkey, it is $2.5 in the United States. I mean, we are not only selling Turkish bagels. We have 60 different products. Maybe many of the people didn't go to Simitsari, our shops, up until now, but right now we are known as the bakery chain. In the Oxford Street, we have 5 shops right now, and we have a shop with the rental price of 70,000 pounds on annual basis, and we are paying 210,000 pounds on the annual basis for another shop. We are just trying to advertise a Turkish brand on the global basis. In Serbia, for example, we have bought some coffee posts, and 11 coffee posts will be converted to our bakeries. We can continue in the second round if you like. We actually have time, but let me ask you another question. You are selling the same taste in the different places of the world, right? The brands that we know are actually presenting their products with a different taste. I mean, whenever you go to London, you see a different taste. The taste is different in the United States of America for the same product. But our products have the same taste in all around the world. And people are quite perplexed when they hear about this fact. I mean, all of our brands, even our buildings, are actually exported from Turkey. And for kilogram, we are exporting for $70.5. You are following it quite well. The average export ratio for the Turkish products is $1.37 per a kilogram of product, no matter what the product is. So for the young entrepreneurs, what can you give as a recommendation based on your mentality, based on your business mentality? What would you like to say for the young for the young entrepreneurs? What would you recommend? I believe we are a role model for the young entrepreneurs. When we have initiated this business, this was a proposal coming from, indeed, a doctor. When we initiated our business, we were at the headlines of the newspapers. They were saying that there was a competitor for a McDonald's or a Burger King, but everybody was mocking with us, and everybody was saying that, why are you paying so much rental prices for a shop if you want to sell a Turkish bagel, such a cheap products? And I mean, we were paying like 100,000 Turkish liras on the annual basis for our shops. And at those times, it was the banking crisis year, 2002, and the bankers were also eating Turkish bagels because they were out of money. So if you evaluate what we have accomplished so far, within 11 years, we were deemed to be quite successful in Turkey. Then we expanded our business to the abroad. And what we thought as a dream back in then was realized right now. And 52% of our turnover was coming from abroad, especially in the UK. But rather than speaking about the UK, let me give you another example. We are thinking about opening 500 new stores in the United States of America. And we have a different growing strategy right now. I really believe we have a good team, which is always thinking about growing our business. And our headquarters is in London, but the London is just like a school of retailing because we learn a lot of things from the London and we are implementing what we have learned in the London. Thank you very much for the first round. Our third speaker is Janamitra Devan. Janamitra Devan is indeed the deputy president of the IMFC. He worked as the deputy president of the IMFC, and he is indulged in the World Bank operations, and he is one of the pioneering figures in that field. We call him Dave because he told us a good story. I would like to share it. Janamitra is ending with A. According to Anglo-Saxon understanding, it just looks like a female name. That's why, by mistaken, he was written in his passport as the female. As they saw him, they understood that he was a male. Then he had to change the passport, but unfortunately they also said that he changed his sex. And that's why he is always saying that, please call me as Dave. Since he gave me the permission, I just shared this story. You know, there is the Silicon Valley, which is establishing the ecosystem, but there is also another important center in the London, and maybe Kate in the second round will speak about the Venice. So what is happening in Singapore and Hong Kong, what is happening in the United States of America, and what is happening in the supranational institutions, and what is the perception of the state to this ecosystem of Industry 4? And is there differences? What is your perspective about those happenings, and how can we support the entrepreneurs so that we can adapt ourselves to the Industry 4?
Thank you very much, Hakan Bey. It's first of all, it's a pleasure to be here in your country again. I was actually, after I left the World Bank, I was brought over here by none other than Rifat Bey of TOBB to help him do a few things, that was of interest. So I came to know Turkey quite a bit. Although in the context of this panel, I'm going to stay away from talking about Turkey because you never know enough to talk about a country as complex as Turkey is. But it's terrific to be here. And after our discussion yesterday, Hakan, I thought that what I'd do today is to give a few salient features of what I've observed from my own career, mainly in the World Bank, but also with McKinsey for several years. But I wanted to talk more about aspects of innovation, right? And I thought that innovation, although the topic is on entrepreneurship, innovation is a very critical part of entrepreneurship as well. And I can come back to other aspects of entrepreneurship as well. So in that context, I wanted to give some perspectives on what are some of the critical ingredients, right, that I've seen take place in in many successful countries, you know, like Hong Kong, not a country, but you know, a region of China, Singapore, Ireland, the ecosystem within London, New York, and of course you've heard of Silicon Valley and so on. And there are some elements of commonality that that we see, right, with regards to innovation. I mean, I'm not saying that entrepreneurship cannot take place without innovation, but entrepreneurship with innovation, right, you know, gives you a greater bang for the buck, as they would say.
What are the commonalities? I mean,
so the commonalities, I think, are critical. One is innovation requires governance, right? Mm-hmm. Innovation is not about just letting things be on its own, right? That it can take place in a chaotic environment. What I've seen is that you require some form of governance, some rules, right, with regards to how innovation transpires. And then there is, you know, within these boundaries, there's quite a few, you know, of degrees of flexibility that people take. So that's one thing that I'd like to mention. Second thing that dawned on me, and I think this has been talked about by the gurus of innovation, like, you know, Clay Christensen and a bunch of others, right? And that is there is something that pays off when you bring in an interdisciplinary concept, right? So for those of you who are, you know, experimenting with new things, new ideas, etc., it actually pays off, right, when you bring in people of different backgrounds, right, together.
Different age, different gender.
Different age, different backgrounds. I mean, when I was in McKinsey, we originally typically used MBAs.
Use what?
We used MBAs, people with a master's degree in business, you know, to team up with on staff and for client work. And we found out very quickly that, you know, the kinds of solutions they were coming up with were not as innovative, not as creative. But then the moment we brought in a physicist into the team, an anthropologist into the team, a sociologist, an economist, right? When you have this confluence of ideas coming in, people bring in their own frames of reference. And when those frames of reference clash, you come up with some new ideas, right? And I've seen this at work. So I would encourage, you know, people down here not to shy away, right, from working with people who've been trained in completely different areas, right, than what you have been. Another thing that I want to bring up, and I've got some personal experience down here, is that I believe that this role of, you know, entrepreneurial or the development of entrepreneurial skills, innovation, and so on, needs to take place from a very young age, right? And so from this context, countries like Turkey and so on, I think really need to take apart their educational systems and ask, you know, whether our children, right, and I'm talking about people who are 7 or 8 years old, right, even, have been exposed to the kinds of things, right, that would inculcate innovation and so on. Look, I came, while I live in the US now, I come from a fairly rigid country called Singapore. Highly successful, by the way, right? Incredibly successful and so on today. But when I was growing up, we didn't have, you know, too many options to question the teacher and that kind of a thing, right? So it was very rigid, very disciplinarian and so on.
How about homework in Singapore?
It was even homework. I mean, now, I was a terrible student, right? So I didn't do my work very well. But when my wife and I emigrated to the US, we couldn't understand what was going on in the US schools. Our kids would come back from school and we asked them, so what did you learn, you know, today? And they would tell you some weird thing called show and tell, you know, or, you know, some silly thing like that from my perspective, right? But it was years later, you know, that we began recognizing that, well, actually there's something about, you know, the US system. It doesn't function always well, right? But in the way that kids were brought up, that in the amount of time that was spent on socializing skills, right? On skills to question, skills to team building, etc. It paid off much later, right? It paid off. So there's some, I think, thought that needs to be given, right, with regards to education and how it plays a role. Just to touch very quickly on the role of the ecosystem, and I know that Kate and others will also be talking a lot about it, so I won't say too much, but there is a big role for government. I'm not of the proponent who says government needs to stay away, right, from innovation and entrepreneurship. There's a big role, and several countries have shown that it's worked. I've been reading lately of the successes that Australia has registered, but I've also seen it in my own former country, Singapore, the United States, many parts of Scandinavia and the rest of Europe, and so on. And when you ask what is the ecosystem, right, that is required, I'll list out a few things. One, obviously, good policy, government policy, regulation, etc., that is conducive to business. When I was in the World Bank, and your Deputy Prime Minister yesterday mentioned it, the Doing Business report, it was under my charge, right? And the number of countries who used the whip to lash me at the back, right, was unbelievable, including Turkey, by the way, because it wasn't doing too well, right? And they were so angry at the report whenever it came out. But the fact that government can come up and support small businesses, entrepreneurship with easy rules and regulations, easy to set up business, to close business, and so on, makes a huge deal. And I'm so glad to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister that Turkey has now sort of gone up the ranks, right, and has improved. I think there is a lot of things that governments can do to help in entrepreneurship and innovation through direct funding, right, that can take place. A lot of governments do that, right, except that it needs to be really managed well, right, and articulated very transparently. There are, in the form of grant, consulting subsidies, mentoring programs, right, where you can bring people who've experienced entrepreneurship in various ways can be brought in, and so on. I will stop with just one more thing.
Please.
Right? Or two more things, actually. One is I think parents have got a lot to do, right, with entrepreneurship and innovation. Amongst the audience, ask yourself, right, how many of your parents have actually told you, yes, go be an entrepreneur? Right?
Never.
No, they don't tell you that. They generally want you to focus on some academic discipline, or become an engineer, or become a computer science or scientist, or a doctor, or lawyer, or whatever.
Mostly in Turkey, they say, go and be a civil servant and be in the payroll of the state.
Exactly. Right, so I've heard of that. So I think there's a big role, right, that parents can play. So I wouldn't take it lightly. I think government needs to play a role, right, but they also need to, educate parents and so on. Finally, and I think this, you've all heard of it several times, and that is, you cannot have an innovative economy, an entrepreneurial economy, if you cannot accept failure. Right? We've read about, Edison failing 1,000 times before he hit the light bulb, right? So this is a common kind of a thing. So accept failure. And secondly, don't punish, right, for any failure. So here I'll end with one thing that actually happened to me in Singapore. And, as I said, I was not a very good student, so I didn't do my homework and so on. And it was in an English class, and the teacher had come in and asked us to memorize a whole bunch of metaphors and sayings and so on. And of course, I didn't memorize anything. And the next day, I was the first one to be called upon, right? And so she says, Dev, I'm going to give you the first part of the metaphor, and you're supposed to finish the second. And she started, and she said, people in glass houses. Now, I had no clue at that time. I didn't study, but for those of you who know, and I'm sure in Turkey there's a similar metaphor, people in glass houses should not throw stones, right? That's what it is. I didn't know that, but I very confidently answered, all right? And I said, well, people in glass houses should not undress, right? Now, I got punished for that. I got caned, and I was sent up to the principal's office, got a caning, and I looked at myself after several years. I said, boy, you know, they should have given me an award, right? Because I think I was quite innovative in coming up with that. But anyway, so don't punish your people if they fail. You know, I think the question is, how do you articulate success the next time around? Sorry for taking so long.
No, it's great. Yani çok ilginç. 7-8 yaşlarından başlayacak bu iş diyor. Yani sabahtan akşama ezberci bir eğitim sistemiyle olmaz.
The innovation mindset should start from the ages of 8 to 7. It should start in early education. They've talked about an idiom where he should be talking about not throwing stones, but he mistook it for not walking around naked. So the teacher punishes him because of reciting the idiom wrongly. But I was really creative, so I shouldn't have been punished. Even if it was wrong, I should not have been punished, is what he says, because we shouldn't be afraid of failures. We should encourage those who make mistakes, because what you learn word on word is going to be only what is taught to you. You can't build upon it by only reciting what is brought in front of you. I think this was a striking conversation. So now let's go on with a young panelist, Mr. Emre Zorlu, the member of the executive board of Zorlu Holding. At a really young age, he received his education, and when I met him, he was only 13 years old. Right now, I believe he is in the beginning of his 30s. And he is a really interesting person, to be honest, because you won't see him in the newspapers, in tabloids, but he does say a lot of interesting things like, I do know my limits in life. At a young age, members of the board of meeting would gather around my father, and I would really like to spend some time next to them. I would take note of their words and think about what was said in that, because they were valuable people, experienced people. What I learned them was extremely precious for me too. Whenever there was a discussion in the board of directors, it was a festivity for me. I would listen and learn. So now, as a member of the board myself, I will utilize what I have already learned as a young person. I keep up with my surroundings, and I share my perspectives with the board. Well, Kate and Dave have already talked about what young people could do for innovation and entrepreneurship. In Zorlu, there is a similar mindset in the holding, and Emre here is a nice example of a young person. This little article, which was compiled from his words, was published 6 years ago, by the way. So, Emre, please go on. Good morning. Probably my position here is a little bit different. I am not an entrepreneur, but for a really long time, I have been a member of an entrepreneurship family. I have been observing, I have been learning from my family and how they did new things and broke new grounds. So In the end, I am not really an entrepreneur myself. I
Peki
lack the
girişimciyi
spirit.
destekleyebilir misin?
So
Onların
could
bir
you
menü hazırlayabilir misin?
support those who are entrepreneurs? Could you at least do that much? I will come to that point. But before that, I have observed that there are several features of an entrepreneur. There are several important factors. This is due to the fact that I have been involved with entrepreneurs since I was 13 years old. As far as I can see, you remember those days. My family, in my opinion, is a family of serial entrepreneurs because we have stepped into a lot of industries like textile, electronics, banking, energy, real estate, banking, and many other little industries. We constantly, as a family, strive to enter new industries. And whatever you do it really good. Yes, that's true. But if you would ask me what I do in my free time, I wouldn't say anything. But if you ask my father, he would say his favorite pastime activity is entrepreneurship. He would think about what he could do in geothermal arena or in the field of energy. So being a part of a family like this one, I have observed that whenever they did take up a new business, they always think about how they can dismantle that field of activity and reassemble it in their own character. There is a certain charm to it. I think Abdullah here would also think the same. The way he succeeded was due to the fact that he thought of doing things differently. So let me interrupt. Rumi in his Masnevi says that in order for you to cultivate a garden of roses, you have to get rid of the weeds, right? So you have to challenge the current strata. You have to dismantle and recreate your field of activity. Well, that is true because innovation basically is about destroying what is there and reassembling it. In my company, this spirit is really powerful and marching on. There may be some deficiencies when you are trying to be innovative, but you can always close those gaps by being innovative, by adapting different examples to your story from outside. We have just listened to Kate, and she has just told us that there was a really significant story behind her background. In her own story, she realizes something important and integrates that to her business. I believe success is really about your story, your underlying story being really powerful and charming. In our own story, similarly, I can say that we succeeded due to the fact that we were conversing constantly with young people who could help us and contribute to us. It may be like advertising myself, but 2 years ago, while I was dealing with real estate, I thought of doing something different other than real estate. So we created a venture capital under the roof of Vestel. Right now, we are trying to understand the ecosystem in Turkey, but that venture capital is really nurturing for me. Every once in a while, I meet up with startups, even with startups that are not even created yet. They are just ideas and opinions and such. This is quite nurturing for me, listening to them and creating ideas and opinions depending on their experiences. And I really look forward to those meeting days because I meet new people and learn new things. We have a similar process in our bank. We do reverse mentoring with Y generation members so that we can consult their brand new ideas. Well, I am 34 years old, so reverse mentoring is not my thing. But, well, I understand. However, Simply put, this is a process of triggering ideas in my mind. When a startup presents ideas to me, I immediately think about integrating those ideas to my business. One of the good things about is that regardless of what you do in a company, there is a culture, and soon enough it becomes monotonous because of that culture, that monolithic structure. But today, technology is advancing rapidly. The speed is so fast that we can't see things in movement. A piece of news, when you learn about it 1 hour later, will have expired already in terms of being valid. Probably being face to face with startup representatives gives me an upper hand in that regard. It's not a monotonous environment. There are a lot of voices being heard, and I can take small strides in terms of doing the same thing in my company, because when you are a big company, you can't suddenly start chewing big lumps of bread. Because this is one of the characteristics of big companies, and you have to warm them up before something big happens. Nowadays, there is this thing called change management, and you have to conduct it really meticulously. In reality, just like you said, among the top 500 companies, right now, not all of them survive for 50 years like they used to. Maybe they will survive for about 15 years to 18 years, and soon enough, top companies will have as little as 10 years of survival period in their lifetime. Take a look at the time during which television spread around the world, and take a look at the time during which Facebook spread around the world. There is a really huge difference, and that gap is going to grow only smaller. We have to adapt to this as companies. So rather than being enclosed spaces, we should be in conversation with each other and keep up with the change. Learn from other people where there are more than one voices. There needs to be an ecosystem, right? That is correct. And we should not boast about being a leader in that ecosystem, regardless of what kind of a big-scale company you are. You are only one of the bricks in the wall. You can't be a boss in that ecosystem. You are no superior than any entrepreneur. Really well. This was a nice conclusion. As you know, Türk Telekom is sponsoring this session. We would like to thank them at this time. So Paul Donay is going to be the last speaker in that regard, being a representative of the sponsor. One thing that is not really known in Turkey is distressed asset management. Paul does this actually. I'm correcting, Sezgin Baran Korkmaz does this. In a really short period of time, he created Biofarm. Actually, he acquired it and resolved its problems. There was Kervansaray. It was a recent acquisition. Borajet was yet another acquisition by his holding. In Turkey, as banking representatives, we are standing in a different part of the financial markets. There are capital markets, for example, where companies deal with portfolio management and such. But there are also asset management companies which deal with turnaround cases where you reverse cases which are following a worse course of action. So his holding does this, and he is already acquiring consequences. Last night we were conversing, and he told me that he has a lot of different ventures in this field of activity. As his business is kind of new in Turkey, it is quite important too. So, Baran, could you describe your job to us a little bit?
Biraz mikrofonu iyice
Could you please close up to the mic, please? It is still inaudible. Could you please open the mic, please? Okay, it's on right now. I was going to say its own, and then everybody heard me. Okay, we are doing something else with comparison to the asset management companies. We are dealing with the banks and their indeed bankrupt debts. We are not an asset management company who are trying to collect the debts which are not easy to collect. What we are doing is not go to the places of the people and indeed make the seizure of their White House appliances or their cars. We are just dealing with the companies who are indeed following a bad course in their business because of their inflated credits, because of their loans. So these companies are about to go bankrupt. And we are knocking on the doors of the banks and we are saying to the banks that please sell that risk to us because these companies are in a bad situation already, so it becomes even cheaper for us to buy that company, and then we are indeed establishing a chains of hotels, and the chains of hotels are working based on those almost bankrupt companies that we have sold. We have acquired indeed a company for $400,000, and this adhesive tape production company has $44 million of debt, and that $44 million of debt was paid actually only with $6.5 million because the the companies who were about to receive the debts of the company made us discount. Biopharma, for example, I bought this company 1.5 years ago, and they had the debt of $178 million. I went to the banks, and the banks questioned me whether I was able to, buy this company. I mean, there were other companies. It has the debt of $10 million of debt. We just made an evaluation, and I would like to buy that company. And they asked me whether I have the money, and I say no, I don't have the money. I told them I will give you the real estate as a guarantee. Then I will indeed buy my share in 2 years. And by buying such almost bankrupt companies, I indeed created 60 millions of EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation. So, I mean, if you count 10 companies like such, from 2 real estate, I actually created $750 million of profit. So, you can easily think about how profitable the business is.
Salondan bir sorusu olan var mı?
Is there any question from the audience? Let me give you a couple of more examples. I have my partner with me, Miss Umut. In Kırıkköy, there was a small company who was generating the ancillary automotive parts, and they were actually producing the first aid medical kits for the automobiles, and they went bankrupt. And the banks told me that I didn't see something like that. Maybe this company is just a fraud. So please be careful with them, they told me before I was about to buy that company. So we almost transformed that company, and in all of the Renault cars, we are producing the medical kits of the automobile. So you can easily understand how I changed and transformed a bankrupt company to one of the leading companies who sells the medical kits to all of the Renault products. Another example. There was a sponge company that I just bought, and they have a partner, and their shares were in a distressed asset. And we are producing for Scotch-Brite and also 3M. I mean, we just quadrupled the profits of that company. It is not a rocket science. What we are doing is not a rocket science. In the past, everybody was saying that the big fish will swallow the small small fish. But right now we believe that the speedy fish will swallow the slow fish. That is our mentality. So do you think the difference is coming from the good governance and the bad governance? Let me give you another example in order to answer that question. One of our partners indeed bought an investment fund. When I spoke with their managers, they told me that, I mean, this man is indeed quite a fit, quite athletic. We have such a saying in Turkish that this man is the guy of the palaces. This man is a courtier guy. And I mean, when we were establishing our companies, we are not doing audits, by the way. We are not doing any inspections. I mean, what you say as an audit, I mean, there is no need for audit because the company went bankrupt already. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the company has $10 million of debt or $100 million of debt. I indeed made a valuation for this company. Then everybody has to, you know, come to a conclusion with regards to collecting the debts. As the CEO of Google said that big businesses are coming out of garages, the garages of the cars, but in Turkey we don't have the garages, but we only have the places, the stables for the horses. So the big business in Turkey came out of the stables. In my stables in the village, I was thinking about such big dreams. The first toilet to the village, I mean in-house toilet, is brought by me to my village. I'm actually coming from an aristocratic family, that I can say. I mean, from England, we have a guest. And when everybody was speaking about such glorious stories, I was thinking what I was going to say in my presentation. I mean, in my place, in my village, there was no aristocratic family, but I believe I was the guy who was the aristocratic man who was thinking about those innovation. I was going to the city town for following my education. When the people, the elderlies, were giving me something to eat because I was coming from a poor family, and some of the elderlies that I have no idea about was giving me 1 Turkish liras or 2 Turkish liras for my allowance on a daily basis. They were giving me some eggs and also some bread. I am still indebted to them. I'm still going to my village to, you know, return back the favor. And I told them when I went back to my village, I will give you 5 cows for your business as a promise. I would like to apologize, but I would like to say one more thing. We have the president of the Turkish and American Business Council with us, and he said to me that you have huge problems in terms of explaining yourself. For example, even with speaking with the Hakan Bey, you have problems in terms of explaining yourself. I remember the first time we met, I had huge problems understanding what you're going to do in your business. I mean, when I am about to say something, I am just saying what comes to my mind. You know, I don't go into such tricky politics in order to pretend that I am such a nice person. I was beaten a lot when I spoke about the truth, but I never gave up. But I believe this is the reason why I existed. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The minister will arrive, so that's why I'm trying to rush things up. I also would like to say something about the principle of equality. We spoke on the basis of the principle of the equality, but I spoke the less. So I will yield the microphone 1 minute later. Don't worry. If a person asks me a question what they are doing, I always hope and pray for other people to be successful. I always pray for the others to be successful because I believe that God bestowed us a talent. If you reap, then you will harvest. Please do not throw stones to people, you just throw roses to those people. Please do not prejudge people. And I just summarized my $200 million of profit within 5 minutes. Of course, at those times, I had some challenges in terms of, indeed, receiving the loans from the banks. I encountered with a Mormon family from the United States of America, and our president really would like to meet with the Mormon family. I just, brought that Mormon family. They had 18 kids, and it was a hilarious moment for us. And they have 3 wives, by the way. And the president asked me, where did you find these investors, that Mormon family? I mean, that family doesn't even speak English. How did you find them? They just snapped on us and they didn't let us go. Thank you. It was such an interesting question. By the way, we obey to the principle of equality when it comes to the speaking times. The bankers are not bad people, as you think. Very briefly, in 30 seconds, what would you recommend to young entrepreneurs? Dream. Dream. As you dream, people will throw stones at you. Do not give up. Hold on to your dreams and never let them go. People will be jealous about your dreams. People will try to hinder you and hamper your dreams, but never give up. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Şimdi gerçekten çok etkileyici.
It was such a striking speech. All of the speeches were indeed striking. But in terms of our time limitation, people are warning me all the time. I know that we can continue speaking. I really wish that the minister had arrived already, but they keep saying me that the minister will arrive very soon. So last but not least, I would like to yield the floor, Paul Deney, to our sponsor of this session. As you know, Paul, in his professional life, has indulged in quite interesting initiatives and entrepreneurships. When he came back to Türk Telekom, he also supported young entrepreneurs. So I would like to ask him, Paul, what did you do in Turkey, what did you do in abroad, and how do you support entrepreneurship?
Thank you. Actually, to continue from the last
Could you
point,
please keep the mic a little closer?
To continue from the last point that was raised, not the dream part, but one important lesson that you hear here is that the people who are part of the problem cannot solve the problem. That's the challenge. When things are moving very fast, or if you don't have the right skills in certain companies, if you're too technological and then you miss the marketing part. Of course, the other extreme is also a problem. Then, of course, most companies really are living in such a fast-changing world that the risk of failure is increasing. And this risk of failure is something that I learned very early on in my career. When I graduated, which is a very long time ago, I knew everything that needed to be known just on one subject. I'm an engineer, and I was working for an engineering company. And within a few months of being there, they had a project, and I happened to know the solution to that because I had that skill. And I was called into a meeting of much older people with a lot of experience. Obviously, they had experience and I had none. But I knew the answer to the problem, and they didn't. And I looked at these older people and I thought, I don't want to reach the age of 50 or 60 and be like them, actually. It was the first lesson because I also understood the meaning of Moore's law. And, exponential catches up with you pretty, pretty fast. You never really feel it. You think you understand it, but you're just not capable of understanding it. That was like the first lesson that made me understand that, being too technological, especially now that we're seeing artificial intelligence, machine learning, what that is doing, because that's going to hit all these technological people who are supposed to be in safe jobs. So much more important is going to be really the human part. of the equation, which finally now is being considered as part of business. Technology people have been very arrogant and wrongly designing products without the human element, and that's why they started recruiting people who have those kind of skills, who have actually no technology knowledge. So that was one of the important lessons that sort of took me over in my professional career. I left my first job and started a company around mid-30s, which later got acquired because I was forced into becoming a CEO. I was more of a manager than maybe I was, because I had this management ability, I ended up becoming a professional manager in the end, and I learned a lot of skills, and that's what brought me back into the corporate life. But I really wanted to do my own startups and stuff, which when I left Telecom in 2011, I was able to build a portfolio of around 20 companies in total, IT, internet, of which around half were pure startups. Actually, while I was with the company, we made acquisitions of IT companies, 4 of which were very important for me, and was very privileged that the board allowed us to make those acquisitions. But there was a challenge with those because telecom companies won't be able to deal with those equity owners, so we had to acquire them 100%. I had to keep the founders in, and they would lose their shares and make them employees, which was probably one of the most interesting experiments I had in my life. I said, that's what I did, so it doesn't make me less entrepreneurial, doesn't make me less risk-taking, but this is what we have to do, so just do it. And they accepted to lose their shares. They're all still in the company, as I have been asked to return to the company, proudly. The 4th company, which was into games, broke up and became 5 companies, and I ended up investing personally in all 5 of them. So they broke up because they weren't looked after. They needed a different kind of ecosystem, as you call it. I ended up personally investing in them, so they stayed, but they became equity owners. Those
in the same sector or different sectors?
These are in games, in internet, basically. Yeah. And then actually, since I came back to the company, because obviously, even though this is a very big company, and when you speak about average life of companies, of course, you are giving an average. There are very old companies that have managed to maintain relevance. For example, IBM, I think I'll give this as an example, that they have managed to reinvent themselves, which really is very impressive to me. So, old companies rarely can maintain relevance, but those that do, the one thing you do know is that it's going to be done by a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old is the one that is going to build that. But what I also would like to say, here, since this is also relating to, a combination of innovation and building up a meaningful business, is also about corporate venture capital, which now being back in a large company, it gives the, I'm very, very keen on this company supporting small companies. And that does not have to be for an equity return that is realized in the form of an exit, because you're not really building companies if you're just building them to sell them. That is, okay, somebody would have to do that, so I'm not going to criticize that. But Turkey has been a very exciting place for me, that I also made all my investments in Turkey. I decided only to invest in a place that I believe in and where I live and where I can contribute to these companies. So some of them became international and left, but still, they started here. So that part excited me, in that sense, and especially when they go out and they are able to go to different kinds of markets. But within this technological revolution, for example, nobody was able to make a Google, for example. Like Microsoft couldn't beat Google or just become a second, even a close second. They just couldn't do it. Yahoo search also failed. So the thing that I would just caution about is that very large successes that are just that are just one-off should not be an inspiration for people. What I find most disturbing is when you see young people asking or imagining that they are, going to build a Google or something like that. I think that's a nonsense. Actually, what you should be doing is achieving your potential within what you are able to do right there, even if you are an employee. And
you also stress on the human factor and delegate, empower them, give a moment for mistakes, and you take it over, you turn it around, and how will you continue? I mean, what would you advise to the youngsters?
Actually, I think youngsters know much better than, they don't need my advice, by the way, but I think that what's important for companies to do is that because the risk of startups is so high and the chance of success of an entrepreneurial young person is really very low because, besides the market risks, they don't have the skills and everything. If these are done within companies, then at least the chance of success is increased. Right. At least you can repeat an experiment, and that could be a better way than just going out there and doing it by yourself. So I tell young people, if you're very entrepreneurial, either keep your job and invest your money, or leave your job but don't invest your money. And then you're giving your time, and somebody should pay you for that and give you equity for it, but don't do both because that's too risky, and that's something that you definitely shouldn't do.
Evet, Paul Done'ye ve oturum
We would like to thank Paul Done and Türk Telekom, our sponsor of this session.
Şimdi çok kısaca
Very briefly, I would like to wrap up what our speakers say. By the way, I would like to welcome our Minister of Transport and Maritime Affairs and Communication. All of our speakers said one common thing. They attributed significant importance to humans. Let people think creatively, and starting from the childhood ages, like 7 or 8 years old, let people do some mistakes. Do not make people to copy and paste what they learn from you. Paul told me that they know better than me. The young knows better than me. Kate, Dave, and all of our speakers indeed spoke with the similar discourses. As long as you dream, then you can be successful. Of course, you can make some mistakes when you are creating. Finland, for example, is receiving the highest PISA notes according to the OECD evaluation. So it is not about investing on the physical infrastructure of the education. We are increasing the budget that is allocated for the education. But first of all, you should open the pathway for the creative people, and then you will see the success stories. Unfortunately, we don't have question and answer session because of our time limitation. I'm closing the session, Mr. Rauf, but in the upcoming summit, hopefully, the president of our champion football clubs will also be present in the summit, because as the bank which is supporting the sport all the time with the motto of healthy minds will be present on the healthy bodies, hopefully we will have another session about the football clubs in the upcoming summit. Thank you very much. End of our session.
Tüm konuşmacılarımıza çok teşekkür
We would like to thank all of our speakers. They discussed about the entrepreneurship, the new entrepreneurship.